Hello and welcome back to part 2 of evolution. So we just finished describing how natural selection can take place, and let's look at another example. So there's variation in genes that's heritable. There's a yellow allele, brown. They have competition, so they produce more offspring than can survive in the environment. Individuals with beneficial traits will be more likely to spread their genes and pass on more. And then over generations, you'll see a change in allele frequency. And you'll see evolution occur. In this case, the brown butterflies were selected for because their caterpillars were less likely to be eaten by birds. So something to note is that natural selection doesn't lead to perfect organisms. It can only work on the available alleles that you have present. That one gene might be more beneficial than the other, but they could both be beneficial, so you can't perfect everything. And what I have here is the different phenotypes based on the genes, and then the level of fitness. And fitness in evolution is survival of the fittest doesn't mean how strong you are physically, it means how many genes you pass on and how many your offspring pass on. So you could be the strongest individual there, but if you don't have any offspring, you're not fit at all. But there's this idea of peaks and valleys where the individual here is doing quite well. They have a lot of fitness. And then if they wanted to be at that top most beneficial at this point phenotypes, they'd have to go through a valley. It's really hard to do that. So they'll probably just stay here, right? And another thing, it's not forward thinking at all. It's totally dependent on the present time. So if the environment changes, the genes that were beneficial before, the phenotypes that were beneficial before, might not be anymore, right? Which is another reason that sexual reproduction, changing up those phenotypes more, is beneficial. So how do we trace evolution, you might ask? Phylogenetic trees. Yay, they're super exciting. And so basically they talk about how you'll have different branches off of the tree where you'll see different traits occur. And so everything beyond this trait shares it, right? And as humans, we like to put ourselves at the end as the best, right? And so this shows what we have in common with different other, in this case, sharks and frogs, other animals. So, evidence for evolution, where we want to spend a lot of our time today. We'll look at fossil records, geographic distributions, comparative molecular biology, comparative anatomy, and embryology. Okay. So first, the fossil record. We look at what's been. One hard thing about the fossil record is the biological species concept doesn't work, right? You can't see if individuals were interbreeding together. So it's a little bit different species concept. There it'd be more morphological, based on do they look like they're the same species? Do they have the same structures, right? And this is showing how different fossils can be made. So this is a fish. Fossils are more likely to occur in watery areas where you get trapped under sediment and with hard-bodied organisms, so like the bones here. So the fossil record isn't perfect. It doesn't show equal numbers of different types of species, even if some were more popular. If they don't fossilize well, you don't see them much. Okay? But you can also trap things in amber. That's pretty fun. And there's a fish eating another fish in a fossil. How cool is that? So here we can look at the different strata and layers to try to find what organisms were present and see changes. Some very important or impressive fossils are these transitional form fossils, like the missing links. There isn't really any such thing as a missing link because if you have point A and point B, if you find something in between, I guess let's say A and C, and you find B, now you've got two spaces to fill, right? But these are links between what we see commonly versus what we don't know how they got between. This one over here is Archaeopteryx. It's like a dinosaur, bird, reptile. It's got the skeletal structures of a reptile, but the feathers of a bird. Birds are also categorized as reptiles. It's got these claws as well. There's some cool birds today that have those too. This guy is Neil Shubin, and he discovered this fossil Tiktaalik. There's a really fun book, a more fun documentary series if you're interested, of your inner fish, your inner reptile, and your inner monkey. And it looks at fossils as well as comparative anatomy of different animals, and it's really, really neat. So he was looking for the transitional link, basically a four-legged fish, or like going towards amphibian. And he was looking in the Devonian period, the period of fishes, and he found some rocks in the right area in Alaska or Canada, North America, and they dug out there several seasons and they found Tiktaalik, which is here. I saw him show Tiktaalik and I built a mold of it, and that's kind of what they think it would look like. It's really cool. He's an anatomist, so it would be learning a lot more about the things in this class. It looks at like shark embryos. It looks at limbs. We'll look at those in a little bit too. It looks at neural development. The book is a little bit dry but fun if you're interested. And the documentary series is fun for everyone, I think, but I might be biased. Next, biogeography, how things are distributed. So they'll look at how, beginning we had Pangea, this like single continent that spread, and they'll look at if you have similar species on this border of South America and that border of Africa, it's more likely because they were once connected than that they both arose spontaneously in those other areas. And Australia is pretty fun because it's got lots of marsupials who haven't had mammalian competitors, really. So the rabbit is doing really well there, unfortunately, as are toads. But islands are really interesting studies because they do have this different adaptive pressures, and they haven't seen individuals from the mainland in a long time. Same thing with Madagascar. Pretty cool. Oh, this was a cool picture from your book looking at fossils of bones, and this kind of gets into that comparative anatomy too. But how different individuals are related based on their fossils. Whales show that they came from terrestrial or on land ancestors that went back into the water, right? So now comparative molecular biology. This is an area that we're learning so much more in reshaping our phylogenetic trees as we get information, especially about DNA. So there's this molecular clock hypothesis where basically if you have a long strand of DNA, if you see a specific change in the sequence, and then you see different species with that same change, they're more closely related to ones that don't have that change. So there's this idea of parsimony, or the least complicated way that species evolved. And so they'll look for the most parsimonious relationship based on different genes, basically which mutations we share in common. If you share more mutations in common with the species, then you're more likely more closely related. You had a common ancestor more recently in the past. So here is hemoglobin, looking at a chain of amino acids. There's 4 amino acids here. And you'll see humans, gorillas, and chimps have that lysine first, whereas horse and zebra have arginine, so they're probably more likely related, and the primates are more likely related. And then they all have the same here. Those match up. And then this last one shows humans and chimpanzees have the same last one. So they're probably more closely related than gorillas and chimpanzees or gorillas and humans. And so if we see here, if we put that into another view of phylogenetic tree, you'll see that we have 98.2% of our DNA similar with chimps. We're less closely related to gorillas and even less closely related to orangutans. So we shared a common ancestor more closely 5 million years ago with chimpanzees. Next, we've got comparative anatomy. So this is where we have homologous structures. So basically, you share structure because of common ancestry. So Neil Shubin talks about this in Urine of Fish, but with bones, arm bones, you've got one big bone, one big long bone, two long bones, short bones, and long bones. And you'll see that same pattern in the arms of a human, the flipper of a dolphin, the wing of a bat, and the wing of a bird. And that's because we're all related. Embryology is very similar to comparative anatomy. Basically, we're looking at what we have in common as embryos. And for us chordates, those vertebrates, we've got several characteristics in our embryos that are the same between different species. We've got those gill pouches, tail, postanal tail, that do more differentiation as we go on. Convergent evolution, on the other hand, is where we have similar structures, but they're not related evolutionarily. So those are analogous structures. They formed similarly to solve similar problems, but they're not related evolutionarily. Similar structures occur without shared ancestry. So a common example here, the wings of a bat versus a butterfly versus a bird. Butterfly wings have those scales, birds have feathers, bats have skin, right? Birds and bats are more closely related, but they evolved flight separately. Flight has evolved in insects at least 4 times. Eyesight has evolved numerous times. With the same base genes and then different alleles being expressed and mutations occurring, you can see similar advantages. And for wings, it's really common because even if you can't fly fully, if you can kind of glide, you're better off. So over millions of years, those better gliders could pass on their traits more, and eventually that could lead to individuals being able to fly. Again, a note that this does not occur quickly. Few misconceptions. Humans descended from chimpanzees? No, they're like our distant cousins. We have common ancestors millions of years ago. Modern humans evolved in an orderly fashion. No, we had different hominid species present at the same time. Some people have more Neanderthal traits, genes than others. And then different parts of the human body evolved at the same rate. No, there's a couple ideas here. Mosaic evolution, different traits evolved at different times and rates. You'll see the idea of punctuated equilibrium, where if you have basically for millions of years no changes, and then you'll see in 10,000 years more rapid changes, usually due to some sort of event that caused lots of decline in biodiversity. But that is just the surface of evolution. It's a really fun topic. I wish that we could go more in depth on it, but it's not really in our course competencies. I hope you enjoyed it.